Hey Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks very much for joining me today. For the past 3 weeks or so, I've been working pretty seriously on a project with my Magic playing. I like having goals, I like having sort of puzzles to solve, and my puzzle for the last 3 weeks has been figuring out what makes MHayashi's build of Merfolk tick. It's so different from our stock builds where we run upwards of 30 creatures, and maybe we can squeeze a Spell Pierce in here or there, but his approach is just so radically different. It runs a playset of Chalice of the Void. In the main deck, it runs a playset of Coralhelm Commander, and it runs a playset of Faerie Conclaves. How is it that a player can have such success with such a radically different build? Everybody seems to have agreed on what the best approach to Merfolk is, but then there's this quiet player just putting up really consistent results. He has 5 O's with this kind of a build going back to early 2016 online, like in January. So all of 2016, all of 2017, so 2.5 years across multiple different metagames, putting up competitive League 5 O's with such a different build. So I figured since MHayashi is not online talking about his strategies and explaining the best ways to use this spell or how to sideboard against this matchup or that matchup, I would take it upon myself to do as much work as I could, to jam as many matches as I could, to really wrap my head around it and try to understand how it works and how he's been able to have such success with it. So I'm here today with a deck tech first in this video, and then I'm going to have 3 subsequent videos where I go through a sideboarding guide that I've built meticulously over the course of many hours of work. I've looked at sample lists for every single competitive archetype in Modern. There's over 40 decks that I have in my sideboarding guide, and I'd like to go through each one with you. But before I jump into that, I just wanted to mention that, this has been quite a project of mine for the last 3 weeks. It's taken many hours of work. And if any of you guys would like to support the work that I do on this channel and the videos that I produce for you, I'd encourage you to go check out my Patreon page. I'll put a link up in the corner right now. There'll be a link in the description for the video too. For any of you guys who pledge on my Patreon page, I'm going to have a PDF of the sideboarding guide available for you guys to download, and it's really handy to have that open while you're playing with the deck because you can just reference a matchup really quickly and make appropriate sideboarding decisions. For those of you guys who don't pledge, of course you can reference my videos, but I just want to make it a little bit more convenient for you guys who have taken the time and the trouble to actually pledge for my content. So I really appreciate that. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and just jump into a quick deck tech. Now, I went over this stuff with you guys about a week ago. I have since reverted back to the Tectonic Edges from MHayashi's original list. If you recall, I was on Tidebinder Mages for a little while. Tidebinder Mage is a great card, but it really just helps matchups that were already pretty well set in, like a lot of the green and red matchups like Burn and Jund and Ponza, Knight of the Reliquary decks. We don't really need all that extra help. Like Tidebinder is just overkill. Where we do need help is Tron matchups. There's Eldrazi Tron, Green Tron, Blue Tron. Blue Tron is a very manageable matchup for us, but particularly Green Tron. With this build, we don't have as many creatures to provide such early pressure. That Tectonic Edge is super useful out of the sideboard, and Green Tron is a really popular matchup right now. I played a league a couple days ago where I faced Green Tron 3 times in a row. So Tectonic Edge, very, very handy against them. Of course, similar to Tidebinder Mage, it does provide assistance against Titan Shift. Tectonic Edge just destroys one of their lands, which can hinder their plan a lot if they're actually trying to just ramp to Escape Shift or ramp to Primeval Titan. It also helps against decks like Jund, like Tidebinder Mage, except Tectonic Edge, instead of tapping a creature down, can blow up a Raging Ravine, or can blow up one of their mana sources if they seem constrained on that particular color. Like if they seem to be struggling to find black sources, you can use Tectonic Edge on one of their overgrown tombs and hopefully set their game plan back that way. Tectonic Edge is also excellent against pretty much every control deck that's trying to play a slow, grindy game. You can blow up Celestial Colonnades, you can blow up flipped Search for Azcantas. So a very versatile card, and I've been having a lot of success with it. And I have to say it's doing a better job than Tidebinder Mage in the current metagame. And again, Tidebinder Mage just seems to be a little bit redundant and not making as effective use of our precious sideboard slots. So that was a change that brought the deck more in line with MHayashi's most recent 5.0 build. The one change in the entire 75 that I've made at this point after testing is trimming the Faerie Conclaves from 4, the full playset, down to 3. After playing a bunch of matches, I got pretty screwed a few times, more than a few times, by the playset of Faerie Conclaves. There are a lot of opening hands that become extremely clunky with Faerie Conclave. Imagine you have an island and a Faerie Conclave, and then you have an AEther Vial and a Chalice of the Void. Well, you'd play your island on turn 1, jam your AEther Vial, of course, and then on turn 2, if you're just left with Faerie Conclave as your only land, you have to play it tapped, and then just basically pass the turn. Passing through your entire second turn is pretty poor for us and can easily lead to losses, and something we really want to avoid. Other situations occur later in the game. For example, if you want to play a Lord and activate 2 Mutavaults and attack, that requires 6 mana. So imagine you're on your 5 lands and you top deck a 6th land, but the land is Faerie Conclave. So you play it tapped. Now suddenly that plan is really jammed up. Against Titan Shift one time, I played Spreading Seas on one of their 2 green sources. And if I drew off the Spreading Seas any untapped land, I'd be able to activate a Tectonic Edge and blow up their other green source. As it went, I drew a Faerie Conclave, which comes in tapped, of course, and so didn't let me activate my Tectonic Edge. The Titan Shift player, untapped, played a second green source, and then just jammed a Primeval Titan and won the game. If they hadn't been able to play their Primeval Titan that turn, I would have easily won on my next turn. So just an example of a game that I lost because of Faerie Conclave. Now, I should say, and I will say, that I have won many games because of Faerie Conclave. It's an excellent card to have in this deck. It kind of works like a 1-drop. So on turn 1, if you don't have AEther Vial, Faerie Conclave is a great play. You put it down, you have nothing else to do, and you'll have access to its mana and its creature ability for the rest of the game, unless it gets destroyed or something like that. And if an opponent is using removal against our man lands, that's great because it means they're not using removal against our more potent threats like Island Walk Lords. All right, so the one change to the deck is just cutting down to 3 Faerie Conclaves to attempt to reduce the clunk factor. Of course, 4 is solid, and MHayashi has gotten 5.0s with 4 Faerie Conclaves. I just happen to personally prefer 3. If you want to try running his exact list, just swap out I think it's the 11th island for the 4th Faerie Conclave. All right, other than that, we've got, in this build, I should probably start with Chalice of the Void. So this deck in game 1 sort of lives and dies by Chalice of the Void most of the time. If you can play turn 1 AEther Vial into turn 2 Chalice of the Void with X equals 1, that's going to turn off a lot of, well, many decks in modern strategies very, very early in the game. A lot of decks don't pack a lot of artifact destruction in the main board. So if you can get Chalice of the Void down on 1, maybe you can shut off a third or half of the cards in their deck, maybe even more than half. Certain decks like Bogles or let's see, Goblins and Infect, some of these decks run upwards of 30 1-drops. So getting Chalice of the Void down on turn 2 virtually guarantees wins against those particular decks, but then it just really helps against a lot of others that have somewhere between 10 and 20 1-drops in their deck. Modern has evolved towards maximal efficiency, and that really means 1-drops in a lot of situations. Of course, Chalice of the Void also great against 0-drops in the case of decks like Affinity that run Mox Opal. You also have Mox Opal in decks like Krark Clan Ironworks, and you have Lotus Blooms in Ad Nauseam, and any of the pacts, you have Summoner's Pacts, you have Pact of Negation, Slaughter Pact, all of those, actually I should say Living End, Ancestral Visions, there's a lot of cards that actually cost 0 that Chalice of the Void counters. So it can do a lot of work, and it's sort of similar to Blood Moon in that way. It's kind of a free win card. So you want to get Chalice of the Void down as early as possible on X equals 1, which really doesn't hurt this deck at all, because in the main deck, it doesn't play any 1-drops other than AEther Vial. And typically, if you don't have AEther Vial in the opening hand, you're going to still slam Chalice with X equals 1. If you draw AEther Vials after that, so be it. It's kind of a dead card because we can't cast it through Chalice of the Void. But the philosophy basically is that we only have 4 1-drops. Most decks have anywhere from 10 to 30 1-drops, and we're going to be hitting the opponent way harder than we're hitting ourselves if we happen to draw into extra AEther Vials. All right, so Chalice of the Void, really kind of the most prominent card. It's totally a build-around card. Merfolk kind of uniquely positioned in Modern to take advantage of Chalice of the Void because we have so many strong 2-drops, from Silvergill Adept to Island Walk Lords, Harbinger and Trickster. And the addition of Coralhelm Commander in this particular approach allows us to sort of chop the curve off at 2, keep AEther Vials strategically on 2 all the time, so they're online early, and they stay online for the rest of the match, for the rest of the game, I should say. With more stock builds, you're often put in a difficult situation where you have to decide whether you want to tick AEther Vial up to 3 or even 4, which, while it might let you get a Regery or a Master of Waves onto the battlefield right now, will turn AEther Vial off for any 2-drops you draw in subsequent turns. And as you guys know very well, even in the stock lists, we tend to run 20 plus 2-drops. So you lose a ton of utility with AEther Vial if you tick it past 2. This deck avoids that strategic mishap entirely by working with just 2-drop creatures. I should mention that Faerie Conclave, I mentioned again that it works kind of as a 1-drop. You want to play it on odd-numbered turns. So if you play it on turn 1, when you have nothing else to do, you can play it on turn 3 after you play a 2-drop. You can play it on turn 5 after you play 2 2-drops, or maybe play 1 2-drop, attack with a Mutavault, and then play Faerie Conclave as your 5th land. So again, it's effectively playing a 1-drop. So Chalice of the Void tends to slow games down a lot. Because it shuts off a lot of the opponent's removal. Often it'll shut down important sort of cantripping effects and searching effects like Ancient Stirrings and Serum Visions or Opt. And with all that extra time and shutting off removal, we get to do things like leveling up Coralhelm. And once he becomes a 4/4, he's now immune to things like Lightning Bolt, Lightning Helix. A lot of those red damage-based removal spells. He can dodge Anger of the Gods. I had a game against a blue-red control deck where very late in the game, I put a Coralhelm Commander out and just maxed him out right away. They had to use a Lightning Bolt and an Anger of the Gods on this one creature to get rid of him, which then allowed me to play another one that I had in my hand, level him up, and they had no more answers in hand. So a very potent threat in the late game, which we are aiming to get to more regularly, the late game that is, than traditional sort of stock builds of Merfolk. All right, so this is a very, very interactive build compared to stock lists. We're running the full playset of Dismember, which might seem like overkill, but really the threats in Modern are such that you pretty much have to answer them a lot of the time or just lose. So even paying 4 life, it's a very steep cost, but if it's the choice between losing on the spot to Devoted Druid or dismembering him, or losing on the spot to Baral in Storm, or just losing on the spot, or even something like dismembering a Hollow One, it was going to probably deal 4 damage to us anyway. So let's pay 4 life right now and just permanently deal with that thing. I've found the full playset to actually be quite good. I should mention that from my last build that I checked in with, I'm back down to 19 lands, which opens up another spot in the main deck for another piece of interaction. It actually lets me run the full playset of Dismembers, whereas before I had moved on to the sideboard. And I'm quite enjoying the playset in the main. With the games slowed down the way that Chalice does, we often have a bit more leeway with our life total than we do in more stock builds. The Singleton Echoing Truth in the main deck is just a very versatile card, can answer any number of threats. If you happen to come against some weirdo that's playing Worship in the main deck, at least this gives you an out. Of course, it's excellent against like Pyromancer and Lingering Souls tokens, getting a lot of value by sweeping away multiple tokens. We still have the core strategy, of course, of the combination of our Island Walk Lords with Spreading Seas. The Echoing Truth, the Singleton in the main deck, is complemented by the rest of the playset in the sideboard. Again, against a deck like Pyromancer, you're going to bring in all of them because not only can it bounce a bunch of tokens, but it can also save our creatures in response to like an Anger of the Gods. It can save a key creature like an Island Walk Lord if we need to push a few more points of damage. If you have a Bedlam Reveler with its discard/draw trigger on the stack, you can bounce the Bedlam Reveler back to the opponent's hand, and then when the trigger resolves, the Bedlam Reveler actually gets discarded along with the rest of the opponent's hand. So effectively acting like a kill spell against the Bedlam Reveler if you have it up when they actually cast that spell. Playset of Deprives, I've been over this a bunch of times. It's a really excellent sort of catch-all counterspell, and the downside of bouncing a land can actually be a benefit some of the time. For example, if we're attacking on our turn and we didn't have a land drop that turn, the opponent tries to remove one of our creatures and we want to counter the spell, we can cast Deprive and bounce a land to our hand, and then in the second main phase, we can play that land again and use that mana. So effectively, in those situations, Deprive only costs 1 blue. Another thing that came up once was a blue-white control opponent had played a Spreading Seas on my Mutavault, and then later in the game, I deprived some other spell, and to pay the cost for Deprive, I picked up my Mutavault, which made their Spreading Seas fall off, and then I got to replay the Mutavault, and it became active again. Like I could activate it and attack with it the following turn. So Deprive's drawback for us, especially in combination with AEther Vial, which is kind of like virtual mana that we can use to play creatures at instant speed, bouncing a land to our hand is rarely detrimental, and it's occasionally even beneficial. So this spell has been surprisingly powerful now that I've been testing it for a few months, actually. Okay, the last two cards over here are Relic. It is the only other non-bow other than AEther Vial. The only other card that conflicts with Chalice of the Void with X = 1, but it is far and away our best graveyard hate. The fact that we can chip away slowly at an opponent's graveyard and just manage it without ever sacrificing the relic is so strong. And then when it does come time to sacrifice it, it draws us a card. That combination of abilities is really, really powerful and doesn't exist in any other graveyard hate card. So Relic it is. And as with AEther Vial, if you happen to draw relics after you play Chalice of the Void, so be it. If the opponent has an answer to Chalice of the Void, then that opens us up to playing our relics and our AEther Vials. But if they don't have an answer to Chalice of the Void, odds are it's going to be hurting them much more than it's hurting us. And apart from Relic over here, we have the Tectonic Edges that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so that's just a very quick run through of the basic strategy sort of outline for the deck. The sideboarding approach varies greatly from matchup to matchup and is determined in large part based on how good Chalice of the Void is against that particular archetype. So what I did was I went through and I looked at sample lists for every single popular archetype in Modern and literally just counted the number of 1-drops and 0-drops that they have to see how potent Chalice of the Void is. But I'll get into more of those details in the next video of this series, where I actually sort of get into the sideboarding guide with you and go through the aggressive and mid-range strategy matchup with relation to sideboarding decisions. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Again, if you appreciate this content, a lot of work has gone into it. Please go check out my Patreon page. Of course, always leave comments, subscribe if you haven't already, and yeah, tune in for the next video where I will discuss in detail our sideboarding decisions with Chalicefolk. I'll see you guys there.